Let's talk to DeWitt.
Oh, God. I know where this is going.
In Seattle.
Hello.
Oh, no.
Hello, DeWitt.
Oh, hi.
Hi. What would you like to talk about today?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I just want to talk about the politicization of science and scientific evidence and how that might misconstrued with the transition from being like a Christian to an atheist and how there might be some politicization there.
Sure.
Interesting.
Absolutely. What's your take?
When it comes to issues such as climate change and other scientific issues, some of the data is misconstrued, not really told the full truth on, and I want to get your opinion on how that could affect someone's belief in transition, right? Let's say someone believes in a certain thing and they transition due to scientific evidence. If the evidence is politicized and not really told the full truth, can that mess up the transition of that person because it's not really the full truth of the story?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And that's why we as skeptics say, don't just believe what people are saying. Go do the research if you can. And that's kind of my passion is, are these sources good? Are there other sources that refute it? And if so, how well do they do that?
If only there was a show that showed people how to do that. If there was a show that could show people how to skeptic,
that would be useful.
Yeah.
That would be a useful show to have.
Stay tuned for V's new show. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, but I totally think that you're right on that to an extent. To discuss this in a more broad context, however, I don't think it's possible in a politicized world to have something that is truly apolitical. There are very few things that are truly apolitical, and very large things that these scientific communities are talking about, like climate change, by necessity become political because they become something that people care about and then vote accordingly. So I wouldn't say that the issue is that scientific evidence and science has become politicized, because it's always been politicized and we can't really escape that. But you're right in that you should be doing as much as you can to make sure that the information you're getting is accurate, so that you can make an informed decision when you're making a big decision based on, should I continue to believe this thing or not?
Absolutely. And go ahead. I was going to dovetail in, but if you want to respond.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to say, how do you exactly do that in a situation where most of the scientists who have the laboratories, all the funding and whatnot, do the research? Isn't it kind of difficult to do maybe independent research?
Well, a lot of them are independently researching. Getting funding for some things is really, really difficult. And that's a problem. And it's a bottleneck to progress that really, really bites. I think we as a society need to work towards fixing that for sure. But as far as the kind of discriminating between evidence and trying to find that, part of that is the tools that we are trying to help give people. There are a lot of arguments that I've been given to support politicized issues that had to do with science and education. And it wasn't until I started learning what fallacies were that I started going, hey, what? That's not good reasoning. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that you're false, but give me a better answer. If somebody's saying the Bible stood the test of time, that's why it's true. It could still be true, but not because of that. Give me a better answer, right? Apply that everywhere you can. The more you learn about ways that are bad, and really that's the scientific method, is we're not proving things true. We're trying to falsify them and see if we can determine whether or not it's false.
Right. And the truest things we know are just the things that have stood up to attempted falsification up to this point. Another thing that you can do if you're curious about more of these scientific concepts is there are a few really key things that you can look for to determine whether or not it's a valid source. So for one thing, look for something that's peer reviewed, right? Look for something that has had other independent eyes on it by other experts in that field, because that's going to make sure that a lot of different people whose goal is to falsify the information have looked at it and said, okay, this makes sense, I guess. We'll let it go on. We'll let it get published. look for the kind of methodology they used, right? How big was the sample size, right? If they're talking to 20 people, that's useful information, but it might not be representative of the whole population, for example. So look at maybe how big the sample size was. Look if it was a double-blind study, which means they're controlling for bias better. You can also look at the kinds of publications that they're being published in. Are there requirements for being published? I know there are some creationist science magazines and publications that require you to be a Christian before they let you publish anything in it, which weeds out everything that they don't want to hear, right? So making sure that you're looking at all of these things can help you, even if you aren't a scientist yourself, determine whether or not it's useful and valid evidence to bring into your own worldview.
Also, just try to see if anybody's debunked it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's old enough, if it's been around long enough, odds are if it's that political, someone will have tried to break it down. And if you can find sources like that, then you can evaluate it from that other side and go, okay, was this a good method of breaking it down?
Mm-hmm. Of course. But in the sense that, so the reason why I asked the question is because I'm a pretty political guy, and I jumped into climate change. And I don't know if you guys know about the 97% number.
Yeah.
You guys know about that with climate change? Yeah. So so when I was younger, I heard that number and I thought, well, the science is settled and whatnot. And when I did my own research and I really looked into it, John Cook, who was the guy who did the study, the way he actually did his study was completely misleading. I mean, it wasn't 97%, or it is 97% in a certain sense, but he, out of a sample of 4,000 scientists, he only took the sample of like 67 of them, and then 65 of them agreed with the premise. 65 divided by 67 is 97%. So the way he came up with this whole study was misconstrued. And if you're a person who is looking at it from like, oh, you go on TV or you see a presidential candidate do a tweet about this, to you, it's completely like, okay, the science is done. Like it's done 97% and whatnot. And it's very misleading to people who, they should do their research, right? Everyone should do their research, but it shouldn't even be said in the first place. Anything that's misleading in the scientific community, it should be 100% mainstream. Just, hey, like stop that, debunked. Like you can't put that number out there if it's not true. And how do you know that certain scientists won't stick up for that or won't try to do that?
So that is a really, really good question. And I think that no matter where you are on whatever side of it, we need to hold our own accountable just as much as we hold others accountable. And that is true across the board. The fact that we don't hold each other's feet to the fire, but we're okay with prosecuting the other side, I don't like that at all.
Right.
Okay. So you agree with that in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, so
to an extent, I would also say that barring cases where somebody is obviously trying to obfuscate the facts and give you something that isn't accurate, we are still going to be, we are human, right? We are fallible. We are going to run studies that maybe aren't the best, and that's true across the board. And we also, and here's a point that if you watch Vice Rhino's stuff on YouTube, which if you're interested in science and politics and all of that and how to get better at determining good science, that's a great channel to go visit. Something that he brings up quite a bit is the idea that scientific journal reporters, so like for Wired or Scientific American, like all of these, for public consumption, reporting about science and scientific breakthroughs is fundamentally flawed because they try and make everything into this big thing, right? Oh my goodness, this just changed everything. We're all, reeling from this new experiment result. And meanwhile, all the scientists are like, no, that's kind of what we expected to find. You just need to sell newspapers, right? You just need to sell what's happening. So they're giving you the information, but they're giving it to you in a very skewed way that could very easily mislead a lot of people, which is a problem. So certainly while you're doing this research, and I applaud you for doing it, and you should continue to, make sure that you're going to primary sources instead of these secondary sources that are trying to hype things up in order to sell subscriptions.
Also,
I think,
if it's something like climate change, there are lots of studies, lots of data coming from lots of different places. So the example you gave, I think, is a really good one that you can actually really dive in. You're not limited to the single sample that you gave an example of. There are lots and lots of samples to pull from. And so long as you're using the best tools you have available to, like V said, going to the sources and determining, you already know about sample size, right? You already know about being selective. You already said that. Apply that and just keep going, because the more you study, the more you research, the more nuanced of an understanding you're going to have.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it came to your guys' conclusion of being an atheist, I mean, how did you exactly come to that conclusion? Was it more scientific evidence? Was it more philosophical thinking? Did you look at studies or anything, or how is that transition like?
Sure. And for people who don't know, Dawit is a theist, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Me being an atheist. So let's see. A lot of it was philosophy. For me. In the end, it started out as finding inconsistencies in the church, finding a lot of stuff that I didn't like in my own church, moving outside of it and thinking I didn't go to the right church, moving outside of that religion, thinking I didn't go to the right religion, moved to pseudo-spiritual stuff, maybe just to see if that was the case. And it actually wound up going full circle. And it was a philosophical argument with a rabbi that wound up making me kind of quit the whole thing altogether. I called it being an apatheist. I just didn't care. I just left it alone. But over time, I wound up seeing and tuning in and seeing that there's a lot of damage that people do in the name of religion, and that it affects more than just the way people live their personal lives. It affects the way they vote. It affects the way they raise their children. It affects the way that they are neighbors and coworkers. And so it really does matter in a lot of different places. And when it came down to it, I realized that atheist best described, and the atheist kind of movement, the way that I saw it being represented, I thought, you know what, that, and obviously it's atheist skeptic, where I went.
Right. And for me, I actually have I have a degree in journalism. So I was studying journalism and how to be a responsible reporter, while also taking theology classes and Bible history classes. And so I was using a lot of this more skeptical mindset of asking all these questions that I shared with you about the Bible and about the claims that people made about it. And I wasn't getting good answers. And a lot of the time I was actually met with either discomfort or hostility, because I wasn't supposed to be asking those questions. So for me, it was certainly an investigative process. Science came into it a little bit, especially for the evolution creationism perspective. But I know many Christians who are also evolutionary, they accept evolution. So that's not necessarily what broke it for me. What broke it was that steady look into research, like you're doing with this, and saying, okay, it doesn't seem to add up. I'm going to do more research. I'm going to figure out where this comes from. I'm going to see what the primary sources say. So that's kind of where I was led. And it certainly wasn't a goal to become an atheist. It wasn't something that I had as an end goal in mind. It's just that I did this to the point where I looked up one day and I was like, oh, I've sufficiently debunked this for my own self and no longer consider myself part of this group. So I guess this is the definition that fits me now.
Yeah.
Okay. And how extensive was that research? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, how extensive was that research in the sense that, I know with religion, to switch your opinion from either a Christian to an atheist, it must take years, right? Because when it comes to politics, at least you can look at empirical data and then switch your opinion pretty fast. But when it comes to religion, I'm pretty sure that took years, right?
Oh, certainly. It took at least 4 years of active, rigorous research for me. Probably more as I started getting into it and then started coming out of it the other side as an atheist. But between 2014 and 2018 was just constant absorption of information, looking at church fathers, reading church history, I learned Koine Greek and transcribed scripture myself and then retranscribed it into English. So I was deep in it for a couple of years there.
Actually, wow, that's very extensive.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. How do you know that while in your journey from transitioning, how did you know that maybe you didn't have some sort of I'm not saying you're biased, but in the sense that, how people, when they switch over and they see something they like, they might have a little bit of biases or.
I was absolutely biased. Absolutely. I wanted it to be true. I wanted it to be true. I was on the side of Christianity. I was like, all right, well, this doesn't seem to make sense, but I want it to be true, so I'm going to put that aside for now. So I was absolutely biased up until the point where I realized that I had debunked myself, which was a shock and difficult to go through and emotionally traumatic at points. But yeah, I was certainly biased, but I was biased to believe that there was a God and I was going to find that he was real.
Yeah, I totally relate with that. I honestly thought that the reason I wasn't getting it was my fault, that I was just too broken to understand that my fallibility, my brokenness as a human was what was preventing me from understanding it. And so, yeah, it made it a whole lot harder.
Yeah. But you said that you kind of had this moment, like not a moment, but maybe that moment was accumulation of all the research you had done and it kind of just snapped. But what was that snap? Do you remember?
There were a couple. There were a couple of moments that knocked me down a couple pegs. If you listen to Anthony Magnabosco's street epistemology at all, you'll see that he premises everything from 0 to 100. So at the beginning, I was pretty much 100, right? I was just like, there is no way this is false. And then there were a couple big things that knocked me down to 75, and then to 50, and then to 25, right? And I could go into all of this, but we do need to get to other calls as well. I'd say that the biggest thing, though, was just realizing that when I looked up after doing all of this research, I was like, okay, I want to go to church. What church subscribes to the thing that I now believe, which is not a triomni God, right? Not a maximally great God, that hell doesn't exist, that all roads lead to heaven if you're a good person, that reincarnation is a thing for some reason that was involved. Like, I looked up, I was like, oh, shit, no one believes this. I've left the farm. I am in the woods. I don't know where I am. And then it was another process to weed out other options. So I looked into Buddhism, right? I looked into Celtic mysticism. I looked into pantheism and into Wicca. And like, I experimented in all these other ways. It wasn't a Christian today, atheist tomorrow situation. But eventually, now that I had that thought process in my head of skepticism and dismissing evidence that didn't stand up, it led me pretty consistently straight down to atheism.
Okay, cool. And my final question is just this. Do you guys know a specific place where I can get either primary sources or just any scientific journals or any place? I've tried Google Scholar, but I want to know if there's any other better places to get scientific data, studies, journals, and whatnot.
If you have a library card, public libraries generally have access to things like JSTOR, which is really useful. I don't want to be self-promoting, but this is such an amazing call. I have a channel where I do this. All of this, how to find primary sources, how to research, how to determine bias, all of these things. Okay. I'm just starting up, so there's not much there right now, but this is my jam. So I love this conversation and I'm excited to continue it.
I mean, I'll check it out. What's your channel called?
How to Skeptic.
How to Skeptic. Okay, cool. Hey, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. This was an awesome call. Thank you, man.
Great call.
Thank you so much. All right, see ya.
Bye. Damn, that was a good call. Mm-hmm. That was a good call.
You're a little nervous.
I'm in my element. That was good. I did not expect it to go so well. That was good.
Good.